Dear listeners, welcome to Lost Love Chronicles. Hope you have subscribed to our new channels Lost Relation Chronicles and Fright Chronicles. If not, please do and help us with your support. The links are in the description box. Now let's start today's story. I turned away from the grave with tears pouring down my face. My best buddy Ken put an arm around my shoulders and handed me his, thankfully clean, handkerchief. Whomever it was that said men didn't cry was entirely wrong in my case. I teared up at emotional stories, and now I was weeping for my loss. We've been married for nearly 40 years and best of friends. It was doubly hard, because we planned a very special 40th celebration, and I had to cancel. It wasn't that I minded missing it. I minded missing it with her. Life goes on. I went back to work. I was lucky to have a part-time job I loved. I rattled around in the house a bit. It crossed my mind to sell it and move, but was conscious of the received wisdom not to make changes too soon. Most of all, I was lonely in the house. The life insurance meant that the house was paid for with a substantial sum besides. I'd given away a tithe of it, 10%, something we'd always done. Some of it went to a charity we'd supported for years that is run by a good friend in a town quite away from us. It is a town center coffee shop for mothers and preschool children. It's deliberately in the bad end of town and serves not only proper coffee shop coffee, but also dirt cheap instant, as it's aimed at destitute mothers. You probably wouldn't believe some of the things our friend told us. Mums come in, and when she asks whether they'd like a drink, they refuse, as otherwise they wouldn't have enough money for food for their evening meal. And in the winter, several of them come in as soon as the coffee shop opens, and leave when it closes so that they're not at home in the cold. Heating's too expensive. Why have I told you all this? Well, it explains what happened to me about 6 months later. I was driving home from the airport late after a long business trip. It was a bitter evening, and I had the heater turned right up. As I drove past a bus stop, I saw this dejected-looking figure hunched up on the seat with bags at their feet. I'm ashamed to say that I drove on. Well, you know what they say about picking up strangers. But things started bothering me. First, I realized that the figure I had seen must be frozen stiff, no coat. Then I realized that there were no more buses that evening. Then those coffee shop mothers flitted through my brain. I swore and turned round. What was the point in supporting my friend's charity helping people in a town far away if I wasn't prepared to put myself out for local people? As I drove back, I was turning over in my mind the best approach. I knew it would be kind of scary to be approached in the dark by a stranger. I drew up before the bus stop, figuring that it was less intimidating if the car was a way away. As I walked towards the figure, I could see that my approach was causing a certain amount of tension, but the figure remained hunched up. Nearer, I could see long dark hair, not necessarily female, but likely. Excuse me. I stopped several feet away to try to reduce the tension. It's okay. I'll move on. The voice was despairing and female. I wasn't trying to move her on. She started to get up, and I was shocked and suddenly aware of why she was hunched. She was trying to protect a baby from the cold. Her coat swaddled the baby, and she was shivering. Excuse me, miss. I'm not trying to move you on. I'm offering help. She snorted. I don't need your kind of help. I was at a complete loss to understand what she meant. I'm sorry. I'm not a hooker. Please leave me and my baby alone. She whispered. I was shocked. It hadn't even entered my mind that she might think that. I didn't mean to upset you. I just wondered if you needed a lift, as there aren't any more buses tonight. I stuttered. I couldn't leave you out in the cold with no coat. I could see that I'd surprised her. Listen, I've got a blanket in the car. If I can't help you in any other way, at least let me give you that. You'd give me that? Of course I would. Then at least you'd have a chance to survive and look after your baby. Very tentatively she asked, what else would you do if I was prepared to accept your help? Well, I could take you somewhere to find shelter. Or you could use one of my spare rooms and I'd make a hot meal for you. She blinked at me. What are you? Some sort of angel? No, just a lonely old man who lives in a big house and wants to help someone in need rather than just driving by. I can't believe you're for real, but I'm so screwed that I'm prepared to give it a chance. I was slightly offended by the swearing, but given her apparent situation, she was right. She got up slowly, and I reached to steady her as she almost fell. Her arm was so cold, I thought she must be numb. Let's get you and the baby into the warm car, and I'll come back for the bags. She really was numb with cold, and I virtually carried her to the car, settling her in the back with her baby. When I came back with her bags, she was shaking so badly her teeth were chattering as the heat warmed some of the numbness. Hold on, sweetheart. We'll be there in 10 minutes. I was appalled and wondered what had led up to her attempting to find shelter for the night at a bus stop. I was so glad that I'd stopped. I wasn't sure if she'd have survived the night. When we got home, I carried her bags in my bag and first then, after I turned on a few lights and the fire in the sitting room, went back to help her in. I settled her in front of the fire and got my first look at my impulse guest. She was pale, very pale, from the cold, with hectic spots on her cheeks where the car heater had started making an impression. Her hair was lank. She had dark circles under her eyes and looked incredibly vulnerable. It was obvious that she hadn't been able to wash for a few days. There were smudges of dirt on her face and hands, and her clothes were rumpled. But under all that, she was obviously a lovely young woman. Fine bone structure, slim figure, although too slim at the moment, and incredibly petite. Suddenly I understood why she had suspected me of hitting on her. With those looks, she'd probably got nothing but. Suddenly I was ashamed of my fellow man. A steely determination built in my heart to help this overburdened soul reclaim her life. First, we saw to the baby's needs. As we went on, I took note of what she might need so that I could buy it when I visited the store tomorrow. 2 nappies left, wipes, formula milk. I had to get a bit of paper then to note the brand surreptitiously in the kitchen. I wondered why she paid for formula rather than feeding herself. A few moments later, I smacked my forehead in stupidity. Of course, she couldn't feed the baby. She wasn't getting enough to eat and drink herself. She had precious few clothes for the baby, so I resolved to buy at least one item until such time as I could persuade her to come with me and choose what she wanted. I also noticed that most of her bags were things for the baby. Virtually nothing for herself. I didn't have much in the house, having been away, but I did have eggs and cheese. I went back into the sitting room to ask if that would be okay for her, and stopped short with my cheeks flaming. She obviously fed the baby as much as she was able and used formula to supplement her meager supply. Clever girl. I immediately turned and quietly went back to the kitchen. When I came back with the omelet and some toast, I always keep a spare loaf in the freezer. She was changing the baby. "Can I heat some water for Angela's milk, please, mister?" What a stupid idiot. I hadn't thought to tell her who I was, or ask for their names. "I've boiled the kettle for tea or coffee for us. Tell me what to do while you eat this. And my name's James." "Kate, tea please." "Thank you." She held out her other hand and I shook it. "Pleased to meet you, Kate, and Angela too." She proffered Angela's bottle with the other hand, and asked me to fill it to the second line from the top. There was already the correct measure of formula powder in it. When I came back from the kitchen, she was tearing into the omelet, and I deduced that she hadn't eaten properly for some time. I was shaking the bottle, and tried a bit of liquid on the inside of my wrist. "Still too hot." I commented. "You've got children, possibly grandchildren?" she asked. When she saw my reaction, she apologized profusely and promised not to ask again. "It's okay. The bad memories are fading. The whole family were in one of the jets that hit the Twin Towers." What she said next shocked me to the core. It was only later that I realized she was probably right. Horrible, but I think it's better than what happened to me. She saw my expression, but just continued to explain. She'd started dating this lovely guy, and she'd invited her parents up to meet him. They were in the Pentagon jet. I didn't see how that was worse until she filled in what had happened after that. Her guy had been really sweet, eventually proposing and marrying her. They'd always used protection, but somehow she'd become pregnant. Far from being sweet, he'd turned into a regular monster, telling her how much he didn't want children. As she continued her story between mouthfuls, I found the milk was the right temperature and started feeding Angela. She thought he would come round when he saw the baby, but it seemed to make him worse. Then one day when she was coming back from a visit to show Angela off to her work colleagues, she'd found that her key didn't work in the lock of her apartment. His phone said, "Number unobtainable," so she'd called a locksmith. When he arrived, he told her it was a high-security lock, and he couldn't open it for her or cut her a key without written permission from the person who bought the lock. She couldn't understand it, but went down a couple of blocks to find a room at the local hotel. That's when her world came tumbling down. They wouldn't accept her card. No funds, they said. It turned out he'd cleaned her out of all her parents' money, sold the apartment, and done a bunk. She crashed with a work colleague for the first couple of nights, but babies and single colleagues you don't know very well just didn't go together, so she'd left. Her lovely husband had moved her away from the area she knew into the city, so she didn't know anyone else really. James had found her on her third night. After the first horrendous night where she couldn't quite believe she'd survived intact, she learned to choose bus shelters in quieter districts. She was at her wit's end, with no money left and waiting for her grand to get back from a cruise in a couple of weeks. I said 2 words and shocked myself. Bloody scumsucker. It made Kate laugh. She was even more beautiful when she laughed. I realized that when my parents died, they still loved me, and it wasn't their choice to leave. When someone rejects you, chooses not to be with you, and takes you to the cleaners in the process, It hurts so much more. I know I'm probably well rid of him, but it still hurts. Listen, while I feed Angela, why don't you go and shower and change into clean clothes? She blushed adorably. I really haven't got any. I grinned at her. You've got 3 choices. See what's in my wife's wardrobe, although it will all be too big. Use a t-shirt of mine. Or use a bathrobe while your clothes are in the washing machine. I'd show you, but I think Angela might object. Just explore upstairs until you find what you need. Choose any room to make your own. I could see the tears pour down her face as she choked out, "Thank you," and quickly turned to hide the tears. Won't your wife be asleep? She died 6 months ago. I'm on my own. I could see the flush mounting up the back of her neck. Don't worry, you weren't to know. Kate fled up the stairs still crying, presumably unable to speak or take any more emotion. Angela grumbled as I stopped her sucking to burp her mid-feed. As I paced up and down jiggling Angela, I wondered if there was anything I could do to get her parents' money back for her. It was much too late to do anything now, but I filed a note to myself to ring a lawyer friend of mine, Kin, who might have some clue whether it was possible. After a few really satisfactory burps, I settled down to give the rest of the bottle to Angela. She was sweet with her little hands reaching for the bottle, and I felt eyelids drooping after my long day and the emotion of Kate's story. James. Kate's voice penetrated my doze, and I felt her trying to take Angela from me. I need to bath Angela and get to bed. I jerked awake. Sorry. Of course. Opening my eyes was definitely a mistake. She'd chosen one of my t-shirts, and even in that baggy garment that came down to her knees, she was drop-dead gorgeous with her wet hair off her face in a ponytail, and wonderful legs and feet poking out of the bottom of my t-shirt. I envied it. I let go of Angela. Can you tell me where the washer is? Don't worry. You deal with Angela, and I'll put the clothes in the washer. I expect you'll want to add Angela's to them as well. Actually, I had an ulterior motive. I needed to know her size to get her one more outfit when I bought the baby stuff. Oh, and while you're bathing her, I'll get the cot out. You have a cot? Surprise showed on her face. I grinned at her. It's actually really old. My child and my grandchildren all used it. Surprisingly, it didn't hurt so much knowing it was going to be used again. A sort of adopted grandchild, perhaps? Kate's face was serious. Thank you so much. It will be a privilege to use it. We went upstairs and I got a laundry basket from my room. Kate had started running a bath for Angela and put the bundle of clothes she's left in the bathroom in the basket, adding Angela's as she stripped them off. Downstairs, I wrote the sizes down on my list. I couldn't believe how small the dress size was and checked it twice. She really was petite. Shoes, damn. I slipped upstairs, hoping I had a few seconds to get the size before Angela was finished in the bath. A quick look in all the rooms and I found the few things Kate had in one. Fortunately, the shoe size was embossed on the sole. Again, I was amazed at the small size of her feet. To cover my need to peek at the shoes, I dragged the cot into the room she had chosen. Then I tapped on the open bathroom door. Do you want the cost in your room, or one next door? I know this sounds silly, but I want her near me. So many times in the last few days, I thought I would lose her. It would make me feel more comfortable. That's what I thought. I've already put it in your room with a clean cot sheet. What do you want to put over her? I don't have her sleep suit, so a quilt, if you have a spare. Consider it done. I went and fetched a quilt and cover and added a sleep suit to my list. I went into my room and showered and changed. It was now really late. When I came out, I went downstairs to get a drink and found Kate waiting for me. I can't thank you enough. I held up my hand. Please, it was nothing. I'm so glad to have you in the house. I've really minded being on my own. She smiled at me and nodded. Just so you know, if I'm not here in the morning, I need to go out shopping as there's no food in the house. So don't worry and help yourself to whatever you need. I've got a spare key, which I'll leave out for you. And the back door key is hanging by the back door if you want to go outside with Angela. Thank you. She threw her arms around me and gave me a huge hug. I have to say, it warmed my heart. I woke briefly in the night hearing Angela whimper, and I figured Kate was feeding her. The whimpers didn't last long, so I drifted back off. In the morning, I was up late for me, but still before Kate. She'd obviously had precious little sleep over the last few days, not to mention the emotional trauma, so I was glad. Trailing round the shops, I suddenly realized I had a purpose again, and I was enjoying myself. I gave my fellow shoppers a bit of a surprise when I laughed out loud for the joy of it. It was fun shopping for Kate and Angela. I realized again how petite Angela was when I had to buy children's clothes and shoes to fit her. I don't suppose what I bought was particularly suitable, but it would help until I could persuade her to spend my money on something she chose. When I got back, Kate was feeding Angela again. In some ways, having a good sleep had made her look worse. She told me she felt exhausted, and I suggested she went back to bed if Angela would sleep. They did. That left me free to ring Ken. Like me, Ken was appalled at what Kate's husband had done. He offered to get her a divorce for free and said he would have a word with a couple of people he knew who might also help. I was well satisfied with that. I knew the kind of contacts he had as a lawyer, and I was pretty sure he would get some answers. As I was musing on my newfound energy, I realized that I still had either 1 or 2 spare bedrooms, depending on whether Kate wanted Angela to sleep in a different room eventually. I wondered how I could find others to help. It gave me a new direction and a new buzz. I resolved to ask Kate later. When she came back down, she was looking worried. "I've run out of formula and clothes. I'm so sorry. I don't have any more money. Please, would you let me have enough for that?" She was almost in tears, obviously hating having to ask. I bought a few things for you when I got food this morning, but I forgot to tell you when I came back. They're over there." Kate thanked me profusely and walked over to the bags. "These can't all be for me?" She was incredulous. When she realized what I'd bought, she fell to her knees on the floor and sobbed. I jumped up and went over, putting an arm around her shoulders. "It's okay. It's not as if I can't afford it. I'm pleased to be able to help. It's given me a new purpose and cheered me up enormously." Kate gave me a watery smile and choked out, "Thank you so much." Then she turned and hugged me hard. We both fell over in a heap on the floor. "So I buy you a couple of things and you knock me over?" I hadn't laughed so much in ages. "Seriously, you are very welcome." As we got up, she looked me in the eye. "It's so sweet of you, and they're all the right sizes too. Thank you. One of the benefits of doing your washing." I grinned. "Later when you're settled, we need to go out together so you can choose some more clothes for yourself. I'm not very good at women's styles." The next few days were interesting, to say the least. I felt I had gained the daughter I never had, and a new grandchild. Kate had a few ideas about who might need help. She was especially concerned about a young Hispanic woman who had helped her on her first night to fend off the countless men hitting on her. She had also advised Kate to go to a quieter neighborhood to avoid it all. Her name was Estelle, and during the long night they had exchanged confidences. Of the few people she had interacted with, Estelle had an underlying honesty and compassion. That and the fact that her parents had died leaving her alone in the world made Kate warm to her. There were tears in Kate's eyes as she related the few things she knew about Estelle. Her parents had died much younger, and Estelle had to fend for herself. She'd managed to keep clean and out of trouble until her 18th birthday. Then her landlord had hit on her, and she'd had to flee the building to escape. She'd managed to find a job with an older couple who ran a convenience store. There was a room above the store that she was able to rent for a large part of her wages, and they'd also protected her from the endless stream of men. Then the unthinkable happened. She was sick in bed, although that turned out to be very lucky, and the couple downstairs running the shop were killed in a raid. Not only was she devastated, but out on the street. There were no jobs, even the most menial, and eventually in desperation she'd started pole dancing in a club. The money was good, and she was able to rent a tiny room and survive. But once again, she was kicked out on her ear when she upset a high-rolling customer by refusing to let him touch her. "So, how do we find Estelle?" I asked. "The only place I know is where I met her. I don't know if she's still there, but we can sure try." That night we both went with Angela safely wrapped up in the back. Estelle was nowhere to be found. Kate was despondent, fearing that she succumbed to the riff-raff on the streets. Then she saw an old tramp who'd given her some good advice, which at least enabled her to get some food and a hot drink. I stayed in the car. After a bit of discussion, his face had lit up. "I know the girl. She's sweet. She'd always share what she had with me and others. She said she was going to one of the suburban districts to try to find a friend with a baby." Kate came dancing back to the car. "We've got a lead." She was excited as she told me what the tramp had said. "Here, take this." I handed her a large note. "Take your friend to the cafe over there, get him set up with a meal and a hot drink, and give him it." I watched them walk across to the cafe. There was some sort of an argument going on, but Kate obviously won. When she came back to the car, there were tears in her eyes. "He wanted me to keep the money for my baby. I had a job persuading him I was okay. Hey, we can come back and take him to the cafe again if you like." Kate looked shyly up at me. "I would like that. When you're down like I was, it means so much." She also had a hunch that Estelle would be in the bus shelter that I had found her in, or one very near. We didn't find her the first night, but the second she was there. Kate gave her quite a shock when she barreled into her arms, and another shock when she told her what she hoped would happen. She was rightly a bit wary of me to start with. Her life experience didn't exactly allow for men who didn't want to take advantage, despite her good experience with the convenience store couple. Where Kate was quite quiet, Estelle was a live wire. Not in a bad way, just full of energy and fun. She was also one tough cookie, and I could see why she'd survived unscathed on the streets. I discovered that she was a bright girl too, a straight A student up to 18 when her life fell apart even more. I wondered. The next evening, I stopped wondering and called Ken. He was slightly incredulous at what I had done. He made a suggestion that was so much better than my ideas that I jumped at it and invited him over, both to give Kate an update, not that she had an inkling what he was doing, and to put his suggestion to Estelle. Kate and Estelle were excited that we were having a visitor, even if he was my best friend and far too old for them. They asked if they could cook, and dispatched me to buy up the store for ingredients. I have to say it was way worth it. The meal was fabulous. I didn't have any doubt that Ken would get on well with the girls. He was such a sweetie. I was concerned that the girls would find the company of two old codgers a bit lame, but they were in fine form. After we'd cleared up and made coffee, I said Ken and I had stuff to discuss with them. They both sobered immediately. Predictably, Estelle voiced their fears. That's it then? We need to manage on our own from now on? My face burned. No, nothing like that. I wouldn't do that. Surprisingly, Kate butted in. No, you wouldn't. I'm sorry we thought that. I smiled at her. Thank you. You're right. I wouldn't. This is much more exciting, if you like the ideas. First, let's deal with Estelle. Ken, your idea? I handed over. After all, it was his idea. Ken explained to Estelle how his firm always took on an intern each year, many of whom were still with the firm. He offered for Estelle to do a long-term internship, with the firm paying the school fees so she could qualify. What her qualification would be depended upon both her work and her study grades. Estelle rushed over to him, bounced onto his lap and hugged and kissed him. I can't believe you would do that for me. Thank you. Thank you. Ken looked a little wary. There are conditions. You've got to stay clean. Estelle's eyes sparked with anger. And work hard both at work and at college. Sorry, I have to be practical. Estelle was torn, but could see that it wasn't really an insult. Okay, sounds fair. I butted in. You can fix up the details later. First, let's move on to Kate and Angela. Kate looked apprehensive. I don't think I can work with Angela so little. I smiled at her. No need to work. Just listen to Ken. Ken looked serious. I'd like to help you too, Kate. I've been trying to track down your ex-husband, but I need a bit more information from you. If you want a divorce, I can do that with the information at the drop of a hat. But I'd really like a shot at getting back your money, if you would allow me to. Kate's mouth dropped open. When she'd recovered a little, she started to try to speak, but just stuttered. Eventually, she managed to get a confused sentence out. You'd do that for me? I don't have any money, and I wouldn't want to spend my grand's money on that. There were tears threatening. No money. Just a sense of justice. I can't even guess how much you lost or how much you might want returned. I think I'd like you to try. After what I've been through trying to keep Angela safe. Kate's voice cracked and she swallowed convulsively to regain her composure. She went on in a whisper. He was such a scumsucker to do that to a baby. Her cheeks colored with embarrassment. Ken chuckled. Don't worry. I think I know a couple of people who can make him pay. Kate smiled. Thank you so much. And she started to relate what she'd lost. Turned out they'd bought the flat with her parents' money, raised from the house sale and their savings. The remainder was in the savings account he'd cleaned out. When Ken found out the sale value of the flat and added it to the savings amount, it totaled well over $500,000. She'd planned on using the savings to trade the flat for a place with a garden for Angela, with some left over to start a college fund for her. That made Ken and me hopping mad. Ken just grinned and slapped me on the back. That's just confirmed for me that my vision of making him pay is exactly right. When I asked, he just said, you don't want to know, and actually neither do I. At breakfast the next day, the girls were ecstatic. They were talking 19 to the dozen and kept saying they didn't know how to thank Ken or me. Eventually, I managed to divert their thoughts to the old tramp, and we agreed to mount an expedition to take him to lunch and visit the shops for work clothes for Estelle and some outfits for Kate and Angela. Neither of the girls were happy about taking my money, but they could both see the sense in what I was saying. Kate earnestly and rather sweetly promised to pay me back when she was able to contact her gran. I discovered the old guy's name was Bert, and that it was fun buying things for the girls. It was a constant struggle to stop them buying things because they were cheap. I resorted to a few of my management manipulation techniques to get them to say what they would buy if it wasn't my money, and we ended up with a fair compromise and some good clothes for all three. We also managed to set up a deal with the cafe where Bert would keep the street outside the cafe clean in return for hot food and drink. We were well satisfied with our trip. Over the next week, Estelle started work with Kin. She had a few hiccups, mostly to do with lack of confidence after all she'd been through, but the combination of Kate and I turned out to be brilliant at bolstering her. Both the girls were excellent cooks and we took it in turns, which broadened our horizons. We learned new things about each other and about food. I started thinking about exercise because it was obvious that my waist was increasing. Saturday came, and we breathed a sigh of relief to have a weekend to slow up and take stock. After lunch, the girls were out the back relaxing and playing with Angela before her sleep. I was out the front mowing the grass and tidying up. That's when my life turned upside down. I just shut off the mower and emptied the grass box for the last time when a car drew up. I looked up as it stopped right outside our house. Funny that I already thought of it as our house. Out of the driver's seat stepped a stunning petite brunette. I'm sure my eyes must have widened, but she was too polite to comment. Or perhaps she was just used to it. Then I noticed the resemblance to Kate. But surely she was far too young to be Kate's gran? More like her mom's age, so it must be an aunt. I held out my hand. You must be related to Kate? Pleased to meet you. Hello. Yes, I'm Kate's gran, Liz. I must have looked startled, because she smiled as she continued. Thank you so much for taking her in. I can't believe what she's been through, and I'm devastated to have been out of contact when she needed me so badly. I came as soon as I got her message. I didn't know she'd left a message. I'm James. I think I must have been beet red and definitely tongue-tied. I felt like I was attempting to ask my first girl for a dance. I couldn't understand what the hell was happening to me. How I managed to make enough sense to offer her the facilities and show her through the house out to the back, I don't know. Well, there was a touching reunion in the garden, with them all talking a mile a minute while I dispensed drinks and worked out what was happening to me. I needed that space. Finally, I realized that I was insanely attracted to her and immediately felt guilty. Guilty because of my wife. Guilty because she was Kate's gran. Guilty to be thinking of someone who looked so young in that way. Just guilty. God, I needed to sort my head out. I looked up to find them all staring at me. I glanced down and around to find out why. Nothing. I held out my hands palm up. What? We were just trying to involve you in a discussion about dinner. Estelle laughed. You were miles away. I was just thankful I hadn't given myself away by muttering. We were hoping you'd take me to the shops to buy, and we three will cook. That way Kate and Liz can talk while we're shopping. Great. Why don't we take Angela with us too? And you'll stay, won't you, Liz? Kate smiled gratefully at me, and Estelle threw herself into my arms and gave me a bear hug. She whispered in my ear, I knew you'd say the right thing, you lovely man. Then in a quiet sing-song voice, and you like her? I could feel myself blushing. I suppose I hung on to spare my blushes, but when Kate raised one eyebrow and Liz grinned, the ruse failed, because I went beet red and let Estelle go. I realized one thing though. Estelle was right, but I hadn't come to terms with it. The cooking was fun. The eating was fun. And somehow there was music, and Estelle and Kate were dancing. Liz wasn't far behind, and I was enjoying watching them. Well, mainly Liz if I was honest, and if I hadn't kept my mouth shut, I'm sure I would have been drooling. Her jeans looked as if they were painted on. She was slim, tanned, and her auburn hair shimmered in the light. I couldn't have told you what color her eyes were. Perhaps green, maybe blue? And the sinuous movements of the dance showed off her musculature in a way that was having a stiffening effect on me. Looking good for a woman of her age? Hell, she looked spectacular for a woman half her age. In short, out of my league. Suddenly Estelle swept over to me and yanked me out of the chair. We danced as a four, or rather they danced and I wriggled, until the end of the song. As it ended, Estelle moved towards Kate and took her hands. They started dancing together, and I realized she had known that the next song was a slow one. She'd set me up. Was I pleased? Yes. Embarrassed? Certainly. Was I going to pass up this opportunity? Well, if I'd been the teenager I felt, yes. But I was ancient, which gives you a bit more gravitas. So was I going to pass up this opportunity? Hell no. I took Liz in my arms. She rested her shiny curls on my chest and sighed in contentment. I thought, God, I can't believe I'm doing this. Liz's head came up, her eyes twinkling at me. Well, I'm enjoying it. I blushed again, just like being a teenager. I can't believe I said that out loud, but her laugh was infectious. This time I was able to speak. You are so out of my league, but I wasn't going to pass up a heaven-sent opportunity. As I looked down at her, I was struck anew by her appearance. God, you are so beautiful. And quite naturally, I bent my head and brushed my lips over hers. To my intense surprise, her fingers tangled in my hair and pressed my head down onto her lips. I gasped, entered my mouth for an electrifying kiss. As first kisses go, it was a knockout. It was brief, but touched me to the bottom of my soul. We were both panting slightly as we parted. Liz rested her head back on my chest, and we moved as if mesmerized until the song ended. I was reluctant to let go of the curves that were plastered against me. In deference to her granddaughter and Estelle, I took her hand and led her back to the sofa. Anyone for a drink? Corny, but it gave me something else to occupy my mind until I could talk to Liz on her own. The next day was Sunday, so church was on the agenda for me. Liz came down to breakfast dressed for church, so I kind of expected that she might go. I realized that they were a Christian family when Kate also said she was coming with Angela. Estelle surprisingly had never been, but was up for trying it, so it was quite a party that set off in my car. After the service, Ken came over to speak to Kate. He told her he was expecting an update in the middle of the week, so I invited him to supper for Wednesday. After that, quite a few of the younger people were talking to Estelle and Kate, which was encouraging. They needed friends more their own age. Liz was, as I expected, quite a live wire and drew an admiring group of men. She rolled her eyes at me at one point. That made me feel special, but I had to talk to her some more. I got my chance after lunch. Estelle and Kate had been invited by some of the younger group to walk with them, and a chattering group duly passed the house and picked them up with Angela being passed around and admired. I'd given Kate a small rucksack of mine to put Angela's things in. I was nervous. I made us coffee, realizing that it was a displacement activity and something to do with my hands. Liz patted the seat next to her, and thankfully I sat with the decision taken away from me. I still think you're out of my league. I've got nothing to offer you, and I don't understand why you let me kiss you. You could have a much younger man. Nothing like going for it, I thought, slightly upset with how blunt I'd been. Liz's hand came up to stroke my cheek. I don't think I flinched, but it was so unexpected. You silly man. Her grin took the sting out of her words. With what you did for Kate and Angela, I was predisposed to like you before I even met you. When I did meet you, I could see from your behavior, she laughed, that you were somewhat smitten. I had to grin back. I felt like a teenager again, completely tongue-tied and awkward. She leaned over and brushed my lips with a kiss. It was actually quite endearing, and I saw from your face later that you were confused. I guessed it was because your wife died recently, and that was endearing too. We held hands, and because you looked so young. I paused for a second. Go on. Say what you were thinking. No secrets. I blushed slightly. She touched my arm, looking both inquiring and encouraging. And well, because you are so, oh dear. One eyebrow lifted, and I recognized Kate's inquiring expression. Somehow that steadied me. Well, because you were so hot. There, I'd said it. Liz just threw herself into my arms, narrowly avoiding spilling coffee over us both, and kissed me hard. She settled into my lap with her head on my shoulder, which felt wonderful to me. You lovely, lovely man. No wonder I think I'm falling in love. I was stunned. I might think I was falling for her, but how could she possibly fall for me? Our conversation ranged over all kinds of things as we got to know each other. It was punctuated by kisses when she tilted her head, or I put my finger under her chin. I found out that she volunteered at her local shelter as well as fundraising for several charities. She'd worked in a marketing department when she wasn't bringing up her children, and her husband had been an athletics coach. They'd met in a gym. She was still a bit of a fitness fanatic, which explained her wonderful physique. He'd been killed in a horrible accident at a tournament when an errant javelin had caught him in the chest. Her two kids, one of which was Kate's mom, had been 12 and 15 at the time. I wept for them and for her. She was touched at my emotion, and we clung to each other. After a while, she whispered in my ear, I want to go to bed with you. I was shocked and outrageously excited, which I'm certain she could feel. Then she spoke again, so I knew for certain she could feel. Is that a gun? Or are you just pleased to see me? We both broke into uproarious laughter. Strange how the right moment can make something ordinary very special. I would love you to be in my bed and to be there with you. What about Kate? She pulled back and smiled at me. The love in her smile warmed me. You can't see what I see in you, and you care so much about everyone around you. Yes, we need to discuss Kate. Or rather, I need to talk to her. I think she'll be happy for us, but it's a bit quick at the moment even for her. She's often asked me why I haven't found anyone else. We've been close since her parents died. I always said I'd never met the right man, and I wasn't going to compromise. John and I really loved each other, and second best, even for all the right reasons, wasn't enough. I never thought I'd have another relationship. I was getting really excited about using my house to help others. It was very lonely before Kate, but I thought having her and people like her would fill the gap. It did, but not the same way as I feel about you. I kissed her again. We just couldn't get enough of each other. Ken rang me on Tuesday. Could he bring a friend to supper on Wednesday? There was never any doubt, and he knew he could have just turned up with him, but knowing means better preparation. Bronx looked like a typical military man. Buzz haircut, fit as a fiddle. When I asked Ken about him afterwards, it turned out he was ex-SAS. His job now was a PI, and Ken had brought him round figuring it would be best if Kate heard it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. He had a nice habit of calling her Miss Kate, as if he couldn't bring himself to drop the military formality and had adapted it to civilian life. Bronx has been hunting down your ex-husband, and he's found him. I asked him for a plan based on what he knows, and he's come up with a few ideas that I hadn't thought about. I was intending to go for him in the courts, being a lawyer, but Bronx's ideas are a bit different. Ken said wryly, "Well, Miss Kate, your husband." He cleared his throat, obviously aware that the phrase wasn't right. Ex-husband is doing very nicely, thank you. He's got himself a swanky house and has set himself up in business as a venture capitalist. He must have had some money of his own as well, because what you had would not have been enough. He's buried himself in a city, but hasn't changed his name, as he obviously felt it was common enough not to matter. Bronx laughed sarcastically. Kate was incensed. How can he have done that in such a short time? Well, I'm afraid it wasn't a short time. He must have started it when you were pregnant. I'm sorry. Kate was angry now. The scumsucker. He must have planned it all. Oh, what an idiot I am. She groaned in frustration, and her gran took her hand to calm her down. I was jealous of even that little contact. How things had changed for me in such a short time. Miss Kate, I think I've got a plan that might interest you. Kate looked up. Okay, shoot. I looked into his business a bit, and he's actually quite good at it. When it's technology or service related, he seems to have the right instincts and makes good investments. He seems to be good at reading people. How does this help? Kate interrupted. Well, he's got a weakness. I'm not sure you want to hear this. Liz held on to Kate's hand more tightly, and Estelle took her other hand supportively. His weakness is films. Again, he's quite good at reading the producers and gauging whether the films they propose will make money. But if the actresses are involved in the presentations with the director, he's a sucker for a pretty face. There were snorts of derision all round, and Kate was muttering what sounded a lot like swear words and not very complimentary names under her breath. He's made a couple of small mistakes with films this way and lost a bit of money, but it's more than made up by his other investments. I think he's been dabbling in this for a long time, but turned it into his full-time business when you became pregnant. As far as I can see, he was doing it alongside his job and using his work travel to take him where he needed to go for his side business. How come his previous work never noticed? Ken asked. I don't know, but I think he had spare time at most of his destinations. Instead of eating and sightseeing, he made good use of it and his contacts. So we can't get him on that? Ever the lawyer, Ken? No, but here's what I propose. I think you'll like this. Bronx smiled at Kate and won a watery smile back. We set up a fake film company with a couple of model-type female starlets and a producer. That's all we'll need, because the rest of us will do all the other work behind the scenes. We pitch a film using both the producer and the starlets, which is quite a bit beyond his normal budget and has extension capability. He won't want to do that, but we'll bring in another investor who promises to double his investment if they can go in together. I don't understand. How can we find another investor as well as paying all these people? I was worried. We won't have anyone to pay, and the other investor will be Ken. Ken grinned. Easy when you know how. So explain how. And anyway, what's the payoff to this? How does it help Kate? Liz puzzled. We're going to pitch for $2 million. There was a collective gasp from all of us except Ken, who had obviously heard this already. He can't do that. His ceiling would normally be about $750,000, but we're going to push him up to $1 million. We're also going to sabotage a couple of his other deals, so he goes bankrupt when we take out our $1 million. Kate doubles her money and he's ruined. Bronx was grinning like a Cheshire cat. How can you be sure it's going to work? Kate asked. I'm not honestly 100% sure at the moment, but by the time we go for it, I will be, or we don't move and we have to get him another way. What do you think? Ken asked. I think it's a good outcome, but you still haven't explained how. I admired Liz's sharp comment and tenaciousness. Bronx looked impressed too, and Ken was outright grinning. I'm going to play the role of producer. I've got a mate who owes me who would play one of the starlets, and I had someone in mind for the other, but I've changed it. My mind, I mean. Why? This from Kate. Because I found someone else who I think could do the role and would interest your ex. Bronx was looking straight at Estelle when he said it, and I suddenly realized where this was going. Before I could butt in, he continued. Your ex has a thing for blondes and Hispanics. That confirmed my impression and made Kate mutter under her breath again. You can't use Estelle. She's been through so much, and I won't have her exposed like that. From my point of view, it was a flat-out no. Wait, we don't know what I'd have to do yet. At least let's consider it before we reject it. I like the idea of bringing down Kate's ex. I think Bronx was the most surprised out of us all that Estelle had jumped in so positively. I had a sudden feeling that I knew where this was coming from. The twinkle I intercepted in Liz's eye showed me she thought the same. So what about the rest of us? Liz asked. There's quite a lot of background work to do to make it look real. We need documents, an office, well, at least an appearance of one on the phone and by email, with several voices in it, and bank accounts. That's where you all come in. The rest is up to me and my mate. Oh, and Estelle if she will. So explain more about what I have to do. You'll be the second starlet. You've got a nice bubbly character which will go well. My mate will do the main stuff with him, and you'll be like the second course that he'll never get to. Your mate is going to. I couldn't finish my sentence. Don't you worry about her. She's more than capable of standing up for herself, and being with him will be like a rest cure compared to where I rescued her from. Bronx's laugh wasn't pleasant, and I couldn't imagine how awful a life his blonde mate must have led before he rescued her. Bronx read my face and said softly with a pained expression, You have no idea? That was sobering. If you think this will work, I think it's a much more appropriate way of, well, revenge. Kate laughed. It's a great deal cheaper than going to law. Ken dropped in smiling. Kate's face clouded. Who is going to fund it? I can't, and I don't think Gran has got anything like $1 million. Ken was still smiling. I am. My firm is doing really well, and knowing Bronx, I'll only gain from it anyway. How can you gain from it when you're funding it? Kate puzzled. Bronx has a way of making evildoers pick up the tab. Ken said, He's never failed before, or I wouldn't even consider it. I think it was that statement that sealed the deal for those present, and we entered suddenly into an alternate universe run by Bronx. Bronx didn't hang about. By the following week, there was an RV parked in the drive, and the dining room was populated with electronics and computers, watched over by an extremely competent, very fit, and obviously ex-military mate of his called, what else? Sparks. Bronx already had an outline of a script in his head, as well as a few suggestions for a production company name and what documents we needed to make this work. It was actually great fun brainstorming the script, names, and logos. In the end, it was Liz that came up with the definitive name Clean Sweep Productions. The logos and branding for the website, which Sparks knocked up in seemingly no time, were masterly. After a bit of research of other production company websites, we all helped with material for the Clean Sweep website. The script was a collaborative effort between Bronx and Liz, with a bit of help from Sparks. It was interesting observing Sparks, captivated by Angela, and helping Kate with her at every opportunity when not needed for anything else. Sparks was bright, cheerful, and professional, but under that I'd noticed a careworn, hard face. It softened every time Angela was near and gained a wistful expression. I wondered what Sparks had been through. Then I remembered what Bronx had said. You can't imagine. I felt both profoundly sorry and at the same time so grateful that Angela gave some comfort and hope. During this time, Liz had had a heart-to-heart with Kate. Much to her surprise, Kate had just said, Go for it, Gran. He's solid gold. I'm so glad you found him after all this time. So Liz and I were an item. I still couldn't believe my good fortune. That night Liz and I were able to be together in my room for the first time. To say I was nervous would be a gross understatement. I was shaking. By contrast, Liz was fizzing with excitement. As soon as the door shut behind us, she ran at me and jumped into my arms, kissing my face in a frenzy. The onslaught banished my nerves and I found myself with hands holding her up and kissing her back like a madman. Somehow our clothes disappeared and I stilled. Oh God, you are so beautiful. And indeed she was. Trim, lightly tanned, curves in all the right places. Mischievous grin, slightly flushed cheeks from nerves. Unbelievably, wonderfully, beautifully hot. Liz laughed with pleasure. You're not so bad yourself, she said as she hugged me. The feeling of her trim body plastered to mine was unbelievable. Seeing her face expressing the feelings, until she collapsed onto my chest. I could have her there forever. Marry me? I whispered. Her head jerked up. Surely you can't be serious? I'm serious, but it's a two-way thing, and I'll wait as long as you need. And please don't call me Shirley. I could feel Liz's explosion of laughter. When her laughter had subsided, she just said one word, yes. I was ecstatic. I hugged and kissed. Then we just cuddled and eventually fell asleep. When I woke next, it was light, and her green eyes were looking into mine. I love you, she announced. The memories of what had happened last night poured back into my mind. I adore you. I must have been extra good to have been given such a prize. A tear formed in her eye. You are such a sweetie. Finally, we were ready with the background work and sent out the first round of funding request emails. Bronx and Sparks gave us instructions on how to operate the phones with the voice disguising software and loads of practice on sounding like a laissez-faire production company and an uptight investor company. Ken's investment company was going to be run out of our dining room as well. When Bronx and Sparks were satisfied we were sufficiently competent and unlikely to mess up, Bronx declared us ready to launch. Bronx went off with Sparks and Estelle to get the outfits they needed, leaving us to send out the second round of funding request emails. We were doing this properly so that the ex wouldn't suspect. Quite a large role for us in the office was simply to turn down offers that weren't from the ex so that the whole operation ran as if real. A few hours later, an expensive white convertible drew up. Out jumped a suited guy with long hair and two drop-dead gorgeous bimbos. They all wore ostentatious sunglasses. We couldn't understand what they were doing here. We had a quick discussion and decided Bronx might have sent them, so just to play along, I went to the door. Come in, please. I'm James. I took them through to the great room and introduced them to everyone. They didn't say much. Then one of the bimbos offered sunglasses and Kate suddenly squealed and threw herself into her arms. Estelle, I can't believe it's you. You fooled us all. Indeed, it was Estelle. So the other two must be... Sparks took off her sunglasses with a tight grin, and Bronx was laughing as he took off his wig. Looks like we got the clothes and accessories right then. Think your ex will fall for it? You bet. Kate moved over to give Sparks a hug. Sparks looked a little surprised, but I could see the slight lift to the corners of her mouth. What surprised me was that Kate didn't let go of Sparks' hand, and Sparks didn't take it back either. I glanced at Liz to see her brow slightly furrowed and resolved to discuss it with her later. When the excitement and babble quieted, as ever, Liz asked the question, so what happens now? We wait and tickle. Bronx was laconic. What's tickle mean? Liz persisted. Tickle is making ourselves known in a few places where the ex is likely to hear about us and our film plans. It's also writing an abstract of the script and sending it to a few people who know the ex, but not to him. Why not him? Liz again. Because we want him to want it. If we try to shove it down his throat, he'll bail if anything gets difficult. Bronx explained the strategy. When he first asks, we're going to meet him, but tell him nicely he's a little too small. That should make him more desperate to come in with us. Kate was on edge the whole time the three of them were out on the first trip. I asked if there was anything I could do, but she just said that she was nervous and wanted to hear what happened. When they came back, it felt like a failure. They didn't see the ex at all. No, it wasn't wasted. He'll hear about us from the people we met. We also know that he's going to be there the day after tomorrow, so we know we'll meet him then. Sparks, I need a private word with you about Angela. Kate sounded serious. I wondered what was up. It wasn't until after the whole thing was over that Liz and I found out what it was about. They told us together, and it wasn't about Angela. Well, only partly. Kate had asked what Sparks was going to do with her ex. Sparks said, just seduce him till he signs for $1 million. Oh, and get him to pay some of our expenses. It was a hard laugh that accompanied the words. Kate burst into tears and sobbed, I don't want you to seduce him. She hiccuped. Sparks took Kate in her arms and soothed her with voice and hands until she subsided. Then they sat down on the bed and Sparks started telling Kate why it was not an issue for her. Turned out Sparks was born to an alcoholic father and a narcotics user mother. As she got older, Sparks realized that they got their money to feed their habit through trade. They hadn't treated her badly until her 15th birthday. One day Sparks walked into the house from school to find her parents arguing with a man about rates. What she heard made her turn to leave the house. They were negotiating how much extra he would pay to include Sparks for his mates. It was a lot of money, so there was no way she was going to be able to talk them out of it. It was too late. Her father heard the door and rushed after her, dragging her back. From then on she was fair game. Some men were more considerate. Some were drunk. But the worst ones were sadistic. Kate started crying quietly. At 16 she got a job waitressing. She loved the people, and she was really good at it. Her tips were amazing, but she was popular with the other waiting staff, so it wasn't an issue. Most of the time she could cover up the bruises from the more brutal men, but occasionally she had to call in sick until the signs had faded. Most of the money went to her parents. She was aware that they were short of money, but not how short. They'd taken a loan that had to be paid back. She was brought down from her bedroom to meet another man. This one was different. He was dressed well, but she didn't like the look on his face. He was the source of the loan, and she was part payment. She had to go with him. His hand bit into her arm. He shoved her into the car. When she whimpered, he obviously enjoyed it, so she did her best not to show her fear. His house was huge and expensively decorated, but she was dragged through and down some stairs. What she saw down there terrified her. Among the chains and whips there were devices she hadn't any clue what they were for. She soon found out. Her bedroom was a mattress on the floor. He would come down any time, day or night, and her body screamed to be left alone. It seemed like weeks or months she was down there. Then her tormentor brought down some of his friends. She wasn't sure how many times she passed out. Tears were pouring down Kate's face as she looked at the empty expression on Sparks' face. Sparks wasn't sure how she ended up back at her parents', and it took a long time to recover sufficiently to come downstairs. She couldn't understand why her parents were always staring at her face. When the next thing happened, she realized they were waiting for her face to look good enough to carry on. They suggested that an outing would be good for her, and took her across to a bar where a large group of soldiers were carousing. Sparks realized very quickly that she was being offered with her mother again for money, but she was still too weak to escape. She was terrified of being manhandled by a large group of men again, especially as she hadn't fully recovered. Then one of the soldiers offered her parents double if he could have her exclusively. Of course they agreed. The soldier winked at her, took her hand, and said gently, "Come with me." Something about him made her think he was better than all the rest. She was right. It was Bronx, and he took her home to his mother. It was a haven of peace and tranquility that allowed a traumatized young girl to recover some of her equanimity. Sparks loved her, and of course she thought of Bronx as a role model. Sparks had missed so much school that she didn't have a chance, so ended up emulating her role model and joining the military. She'd found that it suited her down to the ground and flourished as an electronics expert. As luck would have it, Sparks ended up in Bronx unit. They made it through some pretty sticky situations together and watched each other's backs. When Bronx time was up, he decided to set up his own PI business and asked Sparks to join him. Kate felt as if her emotions had been put through the ringer. She clung to Sparks and in a rather watery voice said, "If there is anything I can do to help, I really want to. I can't let you do this for me after all you've been through. Please stay here." Sparks was stunned that Kate still seemed to care for her after all that she's revealed. "You've already done so much for me. You've been so kind letting me help with Angela. I've never wanted anyone to know what my parents named me, but you and Angela have somehow helped it fade. So what is your name?" Kate suddenly realized that Sparks might not want to tell and rushed on. "Oh, I'm so sorry. You don't have to tell." Sparks smiled. It was the first time Kate had seen a genuine smile apart from with Angela. "It's Angela." Kate's eyes widened. Oh God, it must have hurt so much with everyone saying it all the time. Sparks grinned. "Actually, no. I realized that people called Angela were cared for by their mothers. And that Bronx mother had cared for me too. So it helped me." Kate smiled shyly at Sparks. "When you were caring for Angela, your face softened and you lost your hard look. You look like an angel, so can I call you Angel?" Tears started running down Sparks' face. "Oh God, what have I said? I'm so sorry. Please, Sparks." Kate flung her arms round her friend, and Sparks clung onto her, huffing and clearing her throat. "Sorry, I'm just overwhelmed. I've never really had a friend. An angel." Her voice suspended for a moment. "Angel? Well, I'm not." Kate hugged her tight. "Yes, you are. You are to me." Then they laughed and hugged. In the event, it was the next afternoon that an email arrived at Clean Sweep Productions from the ex expressing interest in the film. He actually had the nerve to request to meet the female leads. What Bronx wrote in reply shocked us all, despite knowing the strategy. It was a politely worded "you can't afford us." He was right though. Within the hour there was a reply insisting that the film was exactly in his area, he'd stretch his budget, and insisting on a meeting. Got him. Easier than I thought. Great work everyone. Bronx was quietly pleased. When they got back from the meeting the following day, Sparks wasn't with them, and Kate looked worried. Estelle was bubbling though, and told us all about it. They'd completely fooled the ex, and Sparks had gone off to dinner to dangle carrots. I had a quiet word with Bronx and asked him to talk a bit to Kate about what Sparks was doing and reassure her. Kate looked a lot happier afterwards, and I savored my reward. A big smacking kiss from Liz. We were all worried about Sparks, despite Bronx's confidence, and stayed up to see she was okay. She arrived back with a big smile on her face. "Job done, boss," she said to Bronx. "He's meeting me to go over the contract on Saturday. He thinks he's going to get laid." She smiled one of her tight smiles. Then, glancing over to Kate, "Want me to cut his balls off after he's signed?" Kate blushed. "You don't have to. I'd make raspberry jam out of him and sell it back to his mother, if it would make you feel better." Her voice was hard, but the look she had for Kate was protective. When Liz and I came down the next morning, there was no one else around. Sparks was on the sofa sound asleep with Angela sprawled on top of her. We left them for the kitchen and the allure of coffee and breakfast. I was kissing Liz when we were rudely interrupted. "Get a room, you two," Estelle moaned. Bronx walked in behind her, putting his hands on her shoulders. "We could use mine, then we wouldn't see them." He grinned. Estelle stuck her tongue out at him. "Why would I use your postage stamp when I can bathe in my suite?" They both laughed. "Can I help?" Bronx teased. "Now who needs a room?" Liz pretended a loud stage whisper. "Who's for coffee?" I asked to stop the jokey bickering. An overwhelming majority as I expected, so I filled the 4 mugs I'd already reached down. Liz whipped the warmed croissant out of the oven and added plates and butter. I love the way you two do things." Estelle sniffed appreciatively as we all sat round the table. Sparks came in carrying a gently complaining Angela. I took her so Sparks could fix her milk. Kate was exhausted. Angela was awake a lot in the night, so I brought her out to give Kate a chance at some uninterrupted sleep. I'm hoping she'll stay asleep till Angela's second feed. Sparks explained. "You've got a bit of a thing going with that baby," Bronx commented. "It's so nice to see you with her." Amazingly, the apparently unemotional Sparks' cheeks reddened. I gave Angela back to Sparks, who had her milk ready, and got up to pour Sparks a coffee, adding another plate to the table in front of her as well. "So, what's happening today?" A cloud passed over Sparks' face. "Sparks is going to meet the ex to get his signature," Bronx outlined. "She's also going to spin him a production sob story. If he falls for it, he might give us some immediate cash while he gets the million together. Sparks and Estelle will have to keep tickling him until that is in our bank. I've also got a few things up my sleeve if the sob story doesn't work to get the extra cash. Then we dismantle and, from his point of view, disappear." I think Ken had a few ideas about making the disappearance a bit more final. I mentioned. Bronx looked up sharply. "Oh." I realized that he thought more final meant disposing of the ex, just by sending out formal bankruptcy notices. Bronx's shoulders relaxed and he gave me a ghost of a smile. That would have to be done directly by clean sweep without mentioning a legal company, especially not Ken's, so that there's no trace. He also had the idea that his investment company could sue the ex for their share, or at least threaten to, then agreed to drop the suit for a handy sum like a couple of $100,000. And here was I thinking it was you that was the clever one, Bronx. Liz joked. "Who do you think taught him?" Bronx grinned. "Isn't he getting the hang of it well?" He continued with some satisfaction in his voice. Later in the morning, Sparks came to find me. "I've got to get ready. Angela is having her morning sleep, but could you listen out for her and get her if she wakes? She'll need to be fed before lunch, so you'll have to wake Kate. I expect she'll be awake anyway." Liz walked in. I nodded in Sparks' direction. Liz walked over to her and gave her a big hug. In the end, she just grunted a sort of thank you and left abruptly. I was grinning like a Cheshire cat. Liz punched me on the arm. "Poor girl. Cut her a bit of slack. I don't suppose anyone in her short life has ever called her honey, or possibly even hugged her. Slight emotional overload. She's also fretting about going to see the ex and Kate worrying. I'm sure she's terrified that Kate won't be able to put up with her seeing the ex. Now I remember why I love you so much, oh emotional master." Liz laughed and gave me a hug. I returned it with interest. Kate did sleep until Angela needed her feed. I passed on Sparks' message and saw Kate's face fall as she realized she'd missed saying goodbye. "Are you sure she'll be okay? I'm so worried about her." I did my best to reassure her and told her that Liz had given her a big hug. By the end of the day, Kate was like a cat on hot bricks. Liz and I decided to stay up with her and try to distract her a bit. It was obvious she wouldn't sleep a wink until Sparks was back. It was a long evening. Actually, a long night. Sparks finally came in about 3 looking disheveled and tired. Kate rushed up to her and enveloped her in a hug. Sparks sagged into Kate, and her body relaxed slightly. "I couldn't sleep with him." Her voice cracked. "Oh God, what did he do to you?" "It's okay. Nothing. Just heavy petting. He wasn't best pleased that he didn't get laid, but he wasn't bad about it." Kate kissed her on her cheek. Then she went bright red and looked down. "Are you okay, Kate?" Liz asked. "I'm fine, Gran. Thanks," Kate mumbled. In the morning, late morning, Bronx called a council of war. Sparks gave an update on where we were, and it was agreed that Sparks and Estelle needed to seal the deal together. Bronx was going with them, as no businessman would sign a contract with two bimbos. I could see that Kate was mightily relieved. The bimbos would go first to warm the ex up, then Bronx would turn up and finalize. The idea was that the bimbos would get the extra cash before Bronx came. So a few pre-typed texts were agreed that would make it easy for the girls to give a status to Bronx. It would ruin the extra cash scenario of Bronx came at the wrong moment. Another period of tense waiting. Finally, they rolled in just before midnight. Both girls looked a little rumpled, but all three were smiling. Well, Liz was impatient. 200,000 and a signed contract. Bronx was brief. He's supposed to transfer the contract money by Wednesday, but he wants to see the start of the filming. That was how we got the extra 200,000. Sparks said, "Won't take much to set it up. We've got about half what we need anyway, and the rest we can hire. The only thing that will be a rush is getting a suitable location." I had a thought about that. Wasn't there a bit on a boat in the script? Wouldn't it mean less kit because of the cramped space, and it would explain the small number of people involved? I'm pretty sure there's a higher place just down the coast. Good plan. Let's get onto it in the morning. We just need to be careful to leave no trace. Bronx added. Bronx went off first thing in his producer garb to hire the boat. Sparks took Ken, Liz and I to get costumed up, as we didn't want anyone recognizing any of us. It would just be the three existing players with Ken, Liz and I doing camera, continuity and makeup and sound respectively, one of the advantages of the boat location. Kate wouldn't be involved. It was too likely that the ex would recognize her voice. Anyway, she had to look after Angela. We had fun on the boat setting it up until Bronx got a call to say the ex was on the dock. We went back in to pick him up. I almost choked when I saw that he was all dressed up in boating gear. He looked so funny. I could see Liz holding back a laugh. But Bronx was masterly, fawning all over him. "Oh, you look so good. How about we cut you into a scene? I think in those clothes you'd look good with the two girls. Now how about a bikini shot?" We could see the ex drooling. If we didn't know that the girls didn't have bikinis, we would have been spitting ourselves. "Oh, wait a minute. It would spoil the look if you were formal, and the girls were on the beach. Let's go with the semi-formal look." Bronx raised his voice. "Girls, let's have you in your costumes for scene 6. 5 minutes. His voice and manner grated horribly, but was perfect for his role. Liz, Ken and I scurried around looking busy. In reality, everything was already set up, but the ex didn't know that. Also, having cut him into the scene, a lot of it would be ad-libbed. Again, Bronx, Liz and Sparks had come up with a brilliant scene where the lover and the wife were confronting each other. Only with the ex in it, the husband would be there too. It was going to be interesting. When the scene was set, the ex and Estelle were on deck, but there was no sign of Sparks. As Bronx yelled action, Sparks came barreling up the ladder screaming abuse at the ex. "You bloody scumsucker. How could you do this to me?" And gave him a slap across the face. I think he was surprised as the rest of us. One thing I know was that his head must have been ringing. It wasn't a stage slap. Sparks had delivered it with all of her considerable strength and technique. His head had jerked round, and there was a huge red palm print on his cheek. Then Estelle joined in. "You didn't tell me you were married." Another slap on the other side of his face. "If you don't get rid of her now, I'm leaving." Not quite as effective as Sparks, but good for an untrained operator. The ex was looking most upset. "No, don't leave." The ex turned towards Estelle and actually looked as if he meant it. "Why the hell shouldn't she leave? If she doesn't leave, I will. Get rid of her." Sparks was on form. "No, don't leave." The ex turned back to Sparks in confusion. I could see that all of us were trying not to laugh at the situation. Estelle and Sparks were looking at each other. "Well, if he won't do it, then we will." And they joined hands on one side, and both their other hands came up to slap both sides of his face at once. They turned on their heels and disappeared into the cabin. "Cut," yelled Bronx. He walked up to the ex and pumped his hand saying, "Wow, that was really good. How about we film another scene with the two of them?" I think I'll give it a miss and leave it to the professionals." He looked completely shell-shocked. Fine. Bronx turned to us. "Is that in the can, or do we need another take? Could you take me back to the dock before you do another take? I think you'll need a professional for the role. I'm not cut out for it." After we dropped him off, we couldn't stop laughing. "Sparks, Estelle, you were fantastic. What a shot. Hope he's nursing a headache for the rest of the day." I hit him hard enough. Sparks grumbled. We packed up and took the boat and equipment back before going home to take off our costumes. Then we had to start on the bankruptcy letter and the letter suing the ex from the investment company. Ken had some examples from the office, so it wasn't too hard. The bankruptcy one was to go out as soon as the money had been deposited and removed from the clean sweep account. The suing letter would go out a day later. It seemed all we had to do was wait and continue answering other clean sweep correspondence in the negative. Offers of staff and equipment we just ignored. I was amazed at the amount of junk mail. Finally, at a nail-biting 16:30, the money arrived in the clean sweep account. There was then a series of transfers which would make the money untraceable before it was deposited in an account at Ken's firm for Kate that Ken was going to manage for her. The bankruptcy letter went out. It was followed by a flurry of emails and phone calls from the ex. Ken had told us how they would be handled by bankruptcy administrators. Basically, we have no information and are investigating. We won't know anything for several months. The next day the suing letter went. Again a flurry of emails and calls. This time was more fun, as we all got to talk indignantly about being the second investor and misled by the ex. After 48 hours, we finally allowed the ex to speak with the boss, and Ken got on the line. It was a masterly lesson in negotiation. He started at $1 million plus $1 million damages, and finally managed to make the ex feel he had a wonderful deal settling for $250,000, rather than going to court without a leg to stand on. That arrived in the investment company bank account the next day, and followed a similar tortuous route to an account in Ken's firm. From there he would distribute shares to all of us after paying any other expenses. We didn't think there would be any other expenses, as the $200,000 the girls had conned out of the ex would do all of that. Bronx went on a scouting mission as himself. The ex's mansion was up for sale as a bank repossession. That was enough to tell us that we had been successful in getting Kate's money back and giving him a taste of the pain he had inflicted on Kate. While he was gone, we started to clean up. We were pretty confident that there was no trace of clean sweep or the investment company. Bronx went in costume to cancel the mailbox. The rest we had done with Sparks equipment over the phone and email. Clean sweep was no more. There was lots of good news after the fun was over. Bronx relocated his business near Ken's firm so that Estelle could finish her training and qualify. Liz decided she wanted to be near her great-granddaughter and sold up to live with me. To start with, I wanted a different house, but she persuaded me, quite correctly, that my first wife had been so much a part of my life, like her first husband, that we should celebrate her, not obliterate her by moving. But you're moving? Yes, but not because I want to get rid of the house, but because I want to be near my granddaughter, who after all is related also to my first husband. Well, I know I can't win an argument like that with Liz, so I caved in. We worked together at the local shelter, occasionally having one home to live with us to give them a new start. But nothing could be like the first one I took in and all that happened after. I often think of, and of course still support, my friend's cafe for destitute mothers. It was that thought that brought so many lovely people into my life together with my precious Liz. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.